It's been the worst time of my life, Joe. If somebody accused me of raping them or hurting them, I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
Breaking news has shaken Hollywood. Clifton Powell's sentence is final. From a tough childhood in Southeast D.C. to blockbuster roles in Friday and Ray, Powell built a name that fans knew everywhere. But scandals, shocking accusations, gambling, divorce, and discrimination nearly destroyed everything. Was this the end of a career, or the start of a darker truth that Hollywood never wanted you to hear? The final verdict is here, and it changes everything. Let's find out. The shockwave. Has Hollywood just lost Clifton Powell? Breaking news out of Hollywood has stunned fans and industry insiders alike. ABC has reported that Clifton Powell's sentence is final, and the announcement has left many wondering if one of the most recognizable faces in film is now facing the end of his career. Clifton Powell is a name you may not immediately recognize, but his face is unforgettable. For more than 3 decades, he has appeared in film after film, building a reputation as one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors. His breakthrough came in 1993 with Menace to Society, a gritty urban drama that captured the harsh realities of street life. Powell's role in that film earned him attention for his raw energy and ability to bring authenticity to the screen. Soon after, he became a familiar presence in the Friday series, where his sharp timing and comedic delivery made him a fan favorite. Powell had range that few could match, moving seamlessly from hard-edged dramas to light-hearted comedies, proving that he could inhabit almost any role he was given. By 2004, Powell had cemented his reputation when he appeared in the critically acclaimed biopic Ray, starring Jamie Foxx. His performance was so strong that it earned him a nomination for an NAACP Image Award, placing him in the spotlight alongside some of Hollywood's most respected actors. Along the way, he appeared in films such as Dead Presidents, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, Rush Hour, and Next Friday, each time leaving an impression that audiences carried with them long after the credits rolled. Over the years, Powell amassed more than 100 credits across film and television, becoming the man Hollywood called when they needed someone unforgettable. Whether it was a villain, a father figure, a hustler, or even a cop. What made Powell unique was not just the volume of work he took on, but the versatility he displayed across genres and styles. He had the ability to terrify with a menacing glare, to deliver humor with perfect timing, and to ground a dramatic scene with quiet emotional depth. This versatility earned him the respect of directors, casting agents, and audiences alike, building a career that most actors could only dream of. Yet, for all of his professional success, Powell's personal and professional journey was far from smooth, and the news of his so-called final sentence now forces us to look at both the triumphs and the troubles that have defined his life in Hollywood. How could a man who worked so hard to climb from obscurity to recognition, who survived the harsh streets of Southeast Washington, D.C., and turned his life into a Hollywood story, now find himself at the center of a breaking news bulletin that sounds like the end of the road? The contrast between success and downfall has rarely been so stark. On one hand, Powell was the actor who seemed to be everywhere, appearing in blockbuster films and cult classics alike. On the other hand, his off-screen struggles and controversies were mounting, creating a parallel story that was far less glamorous than the red carpets and flashing cameras suggested. This is why the announcement of his final sentence carries such a powerful weight. It's about an entire career being put under the harshest light imaginable. Hollywood has seen many scandals before, but this case raises the question: when the industry and the public make up their minds, can a man ever truly recover? The case that nearly ended everything. Newly resurfaced details confirm that Clifton Powell's long-running legal battle which first began more than a decade ago, has now been finally settled, with no criminal charges upheld. For years, the story was whispered about, but only now is the full picture clear. A man once known for his commanding presence in over 100 movies found himself brought to his knees. But the most disturbing part of this saga is how much damage had already been done long before the courts made their decision. How does an allegation with no proven foundation nearly destroy the career of a man who fought so hard to build his life? And more importantly, what does this say about the power of public opinion in the world of entertainment? The ordeal began in the late summer of 2011, when a woman using the pseudonym Keontae Myers came forward with shocking accusations against Powell. According to her claims, an encounter in a hotel room in New Orleans crossed a line, beginning as consensual and then becoming, in her words, too aggressive to continue. She alleged that when she asked him to stop, he ignored her request and carried on regardless. Myers, who at the time worked as a cocktail waitress at Harrah's Casino, filed a complaint that quickly spread to the press. Outlets such as TMZ picked it up, reporting on the incident in blunt headlines that left little room for nuance or interpretation. For Powell, the sudden shift was devastating. Overnight, the actor who had made audiences laugh in Friday and moved them in Ray was being painted in an entirely different light, with his name linked to one of the most serious allegations a man can face. From the very beginning, Powell denied the claims unequivocally. Through his representative, he issued a statement declaring that the accusations were false and that he intended to pursue every possible legal remedy against the woman who had made them. Yet, once such allegations enter the public sphere, the damage begins immediately. Even though the original criminal investigation was dismissed for lack of evidence, the headlines did not vanish. Myers later pursued a civil case against Powell, seeking financial damages in excess of $75,000. This meant that even without a criminal conviction, Powell would remain entangled in a legal fight that could drag on for years, forcing him to defend not just his freedom, but his reputation. The civil case became the center of Powell's life, taking up time, money, and emotional energy. Unlike criminal court, where the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt, civil cases operate on what lawyers call a preponderance of evidence. This means that rather than proving guilt to near certainty, the question becomes whether it is more likely than not that the accusation is true. For celebrities, this creates an especially dangerous environment, because even the suggestion of wrongdoing can be enough to taint careers, regardless of what the courts eventually decide. Powell understood this clearly, telling interviewers later that the worst part was not the legal process itself, but the erosion of trust, the loss of work, and the realization that many people had already made up their minds. Hollywood is not known for its patience or loyalty when scandal erupts. The entertainment industry, worth billions, relies heavily on reputation and public image, and studios are quick to distance themselves from any actor whose name becomes controversial. For Powell, the impact was immediate. Roles he had already secured began to vanish. Producers grew hesitant, not wanting to risk negative press. Television appearances that once would have been his for the taking were suddenly canceled after only a few episodes. Powell himself recalled one specific show where he expected to appear in 7 or 8 episodes, only to see his part disappear after the second, with no explanation other than the cloud of allegations hanging over him. The emotional toll was even heavier than the financial losses. Powell described the period as the most painful experience of his life since the death of his father decades earlier. He explained that as a father himself, the accusations cut deeply, not only because of what they implied, but because of how his own children might view him in the wake of such headlines. He maintained his innocence throughout, but he could not shield his family from the whispers, the rumors, and the doubts that followed them everywhere. When he walked down the street, he saw the suspicion in strangers' eyes. Online, anonymous comments painted him as guilty before any court had even considered the evidence. In a business where public perception often means more than facts, Powell had been effectively sentenced by the court of opinion. The civil case wound its way slowly through the system. For 4 long years, Powell lived under its shadow, struggling to maintain both his career and his personal life while lawyers and judges debated the details. In 2017, the case was finally thrown out, with insufficient evidence to support the claims. By 2018, his own counterclaims for defamation and emotional distress were also dismissed, leaving the entire matter closed. Yet even in victory, Powell found himself grappling with a strange reality. While the courts had cleared him, Hollywood had not. This is the heart of Powell's tragedy, and it is where the phrase "final sentence" takes on its deepest meaning. He was never found guilty of any crime, but the sentence he carried was one imposed by the loss of reputation. In an industry where perception can be more powerful than truth, accusations themselves became the punishment. Looking at the facts, it is clear that Clifton Powell was never convicted of any offense. Yet, looking at his career, the damage is undeniable. He was stripped of roles, of trust, and of the steady momentum that had made him one of Hollywood's most dependable performers. The case dragged on long enough to derail critical years of his working life. Years he can never recover. His experience illustrates that in Hollywood, the perception of guilt can sometimes carry more weight than actual evidence. A dismissed case should have freed him completely, but instead, it created a lasting scar. Colorism, discrimination, and Hollywood politics. Clifton Powell's career was shaped not only by the personal troubles that dragged him into courtrooms and tabloids, but also by systemic barriers that have existed in Hollywood for generations. Powell has spoken openly about how casting decisions were influenced not by his talent or his professionalism, but by the shade of his skin. He recalled situations where producers or network executives dismissed him outright, saying that he was too dark for the role, or, in one particularly painful instance, that he was so dark he might scare viewers. Hearing these kinds of rejections repeatedly left Powell questioning whether his years of training and proven track record even mattered when the first thing people noticed was his complexion. Hollywood has long operated on the principle that marketability is tied to relatability, and relatability is often judged by how closely an actor conforms to Eurocentric beauty standards. In practical terms, this meant that darker-skinned actors were frequently excluded from leading roles, particularly in romance-driven plots, or roles that required the audience to identify with the character in a sympathetic way. Powell's talent was undeniable, but these systemic preferences placed him at a disadvantage that no amount of hard work could fully erase. What makes this reality even more disturbing is the contradiction it revealed. Powell was often praised for his ability to play gritty, intimidating, or menacing characters. Yet when it came time to cast a character who demanded sensitivity, charm, or vulnerability, his skin tone was suddenly considered a barrier. This double standard limited his growth as an actor, confining him to certain archetypes while keeping him away from opportunities that could have expanded his range in the eyes of the public. It also contributed to the cycle of misperception that haunted him during his legal troubles, because audiences were already accustomed to seeing him in roles that highlighted the darker side of human behavior. Powell's frustrations did not stop at the casting table. Within the black entertainment community itself, he noticed a damaging tendency to criticize one another in public forums, particularly in mainstream outlets that were already quick to dismiss black artistry. In one instance, he found himself at odds with acclaimed director Spike Lee, after Lee made remarks that Powell saw as unnecessarily harsh toward another black actor. Powell responded publicly, saying that he did not respect anyone, including himself, his son, or his daughter, who would go to crossover press and put down a fellow black entertainer who was trying to succeed in the business. This stance reflected his belief in solidarity, even in an environment where competition was fierce and opportunities limited. For Powell, tearing each other down only reinforced the systemic barriers that already made success harder to achieve. This sense of standing firm despite barriers was part of what made his NAACP Image Award nomination for his role in Ray so significant. That nomination was not simply about recognition for a single performance, but about validation that his work mattered beyond the restrictions of Hollywood's biases. In Ray, Powell played Jeff Brown, the loyal road manager of Ray Charles, and his nuanced performance stood alongside Jamie Foxx's Oscar-winning portrayal of the music legend. The recognition proved that his contributions could not be ignored, even in an environment that often overlooked actors like him. The nomination was a rare moment where the system acknowledged his worth without qualifications or dismissals based on his appearance. Still, the fact remains that opportunities for darker-skinned actors were consistently fewer, and Powell's career bears the marks of that discrimination. The systemic bias did not always present itself in loud or overt ways. Sometimes it was subtle, hidden in the language of market concerns, target demographics, or creative vision. These terms sound neutral, but often mask decisions rooted in prejudice. For Powell, this meant constantly fighting not just for roles, but for the right to be considered equally in the first place. Personal struggles, temptations, and loss. Clifton Powell's rise in Hollywood is often remembered through the lens of the characters he portrayed. But the man behind the screen was shaped by a childhood that forced him to grow up faster than most. Born and raised in Southeast Washington, D.C., Powell came of age in one of the most difficult neighborhoods in the city, a place where crime, poverty, and lack of opportunity defined the lives of many young men. When he was only 4 years old, his mother passed away, leaving him in the care of a father who struggled with alcoholism and could not provide the stability a child so desperately needs. Powell often described those early years as a constant fight to stay out of trouble, surrounded by friends and peers who were frequently pulled into dangerous paths that led to jail cells or worse. For him, survival meant leaning on mentors and the small network of family members who stepped in to keep him from being swallowed by the streets. Although he escaped that childhood with determination and discipline, the wounds of loss and instability followed him into adulthood. Like many who grow up with disrupted family lives, Powell sought comfort in building a home of his own. He married Kimberly Powell, and together they built what seemed on the surface like a stable family. But Hollywood's demands quickly strained the marriage. The constant travel, the long hours on set, and the allure of fame placed Powell in situations that tested his resolve. Eventually, the relationship collapsed, leaving him devastated. The divorce cost him not just emotionally, but financially, with Powell himself admitting that he lost $5 million in the process. For a man who had worked for decades to achieve financial security, the blow was enormous, stripping him of savings and leaving him to rebuild at a stage of life when many of his peers were preparing for retirement. Powell has spoken candidly about the mistakes he made during this period, acknowledging that his devotion to work and the temptations of fame left him absent from his children's lives. "I wasn't there for my children like I should have been," he admitted, a confession that reveals both regret and self-awareness. He explained that while he had provided financially, his physical absence and emotional distance left a gap that could not be filled by money or gifts. He reflected that being gone 50% of the time might have been manageable, but being gone 70% was too much. This awareness came too late to prevent the breakdown of his marriage and the strain on his family. But it illustrates the emotional cost of a life lived in pursuit of success under the relentless spotlight of Hollywood. Alongside these personal struggles, Powell also fell victim to the temptations that have ensnared many in the entertainment industry. He admitted to gambling heavily, often blowing between $30,000 and $50,000 a year at casinos. What might seem like small indulgences for a wealthy celebrity added up quickly, draining his finances further and feeding into the instability already created by his divorce. Powell also acknowledged the presence of women and fake friends, people who surrounded him not because of who he was, but because of what he could provide. The lifestyle of constant spending, fleeting relationships, and shallow friendships created a sense of imbalance that left him increasingly vulnerable. He later described this period as a spiral, where decisions that felt exciting in the moment only deepened his problems in the long run. The duality of Powell's life became increasingly stark. Outwardly, he was a successful actor, appearing in films and television shows that reached audiences worldwide. Fans saw him on screen as powerful, confident, and larger than life. Inwardly, however, he was a man struggling to keep his family together, wrestling with financial losses and drowning in the consequences of his own decisions. The facade of success hid a personal reality that was fragile and unstable. This dissonance between perception and reality left him particularly exposed when the accusations of 2011 emerged. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the next video for more exciting content.